Welcome back to TarHillIllustrated.com, and if you're watching on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me, as he often does, THI publisher Andrew Jones. Andrew, here for our THI Postscript Podcast, following Carolina's 48-21 victory over NC State yesterday in Chapel Hill. We hit on a lot of things during our Three Things video, which if you haven't seen yet, be sure to check that out on our YouTube channel. But there's still a lot to talk about following yesterday's game. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on here in the Postscript Podcast. First thing I want to touch on, AJ, it was a big win for Carolina. This is, like I mentioned, this is something we did touch on the Three Things podcast. But 48-21 win, it was a lot more comfortable than even that scoreline reflected, I think, giving Carolina a little bit momentum going into the rest of the season. But, AJ, following that game, now that you got a little bit more time to dissect it, just how big of a win was that for Carolina yesterday over the Wolfpack?
It was a huge win when you blow out your rival, as they did, and a pretty good team that had been playing. NC State felt really good about itself. Think about where the Wolfpack was when they left Blacksburg. The narrative was, well, does Dave Dorn survive the season? I know a lot of people that cover that team. I know a lot of people that support that program, and that's all they talked about after Blacksburg, which was a month ago. Mm-hmm. They roll into Chapel Hill nationally ranked.
I know.
That's a heck of a turnaround that Dorn and the Wolfpack had made. Mm-hmm. But they ran into a better team, what has become a better program, and a club that played really well in almost every area yesterday or on Saturday. Mm-hmm. And I think for Carolina, this was – I use the word growth a lot, and some people are like, AJ, you're always using growth. You're always talking about process. You're always talking about human nature. But I'm going to keep talking about those things because I'm telling you, that stuff is living inside whatever's going on. A program's either growing or it's not growing. A team's either growing or it's not growing. The Tar Heels are growing. Even what happened in Tallahassee was growth because they had to learn. They had to go through that in order to get to this stage this week and continue moving forward. And I think that's what Saturday was about. It was about getting better. It was about learning to trust what the coaches are saying. It was about learning to tune out the positives coming from the outside world and just use the negatives as fuel, but really only pay attention to what your coaches are telling you. They're the ones who know. Mac's a Hall of Famer for a reason. Guys, the rest of the guys on the staff, they know what they're talking about. So as they continue to insulate the message in that program and strengthen it during that process, I think they saw all that kind of come to fruition again this past week. 18 games. We talked about this in the Three Things video, Jacob. 18 games is not a lot of time. No. But in 18 games, think about how much this club, this program, all these kids have moved in the direction that we're talking about fully trusting what the staff is telling them. And I think Saturday was a perfect example of all of that showing up at the same time at the same place.
I agree, AJ. I think it was a scoreline I didn't expect. I thought it would be a little bit closer than that. I thought that State would play a little bit better, maybe play with a little bit more energy. I know the main thing for me, I was in the concourse shooting photos, and I think I tweeted it during the game, but it was probably because there was only 2,500, 3,000 fans there. But it was just missing that kind of rivalry, that kind of grittiness, even on the field. I mean, you didn't see a lot of pushing and shoving. You didn't really see a lot of trash talking. That was one thing that I did miss from this rivalry because, I mean, you would know better than anybody. You've covered a lot of these rivalry games. I mean, this State-UNC rivalry in terms of the fans not liking each other, especially as much as they don't. I mean, it's an intense atmosphere, usually off the field and on the field. And I think that was a big thing missing from yesterday as well. But kind of, in a way,
Well, I agree, by the way. Let me chime in real fast. I agree. And I was in the press box. You've been in the press box a lot. You don't hear as much.
No, you don't.
So hearing you say that is interesting because you were out there. Mm-hmm. And you were right above the student section, or I should say the student section. Mm-hmm. So it didn't feel like it. Warm-ups didn't feel like it. The only thing that made it seem like it was State Carolina was the uniforms, the colors. Yep. But, State didn't have its band there. We didn't hear its fight song. It's 2020 college football, man. Just show up, play the game, win or lose, go home. I think that there is a wear and tear factor mentally that a lot of these kids are dealing with around the country, that it's a testament to them to find the motivation to get up every week and go play. And some people say, well, gee, they're playing a sport. Now they've been back on campus since June.
Yeah.
And they've been doing football related stuff. And I know that fall camp started August 6th for Carolina, but they were doing football stuff. They were wearing some equipment for weeks before that. So this is a long, long grind. For what they lost, not having the spring and not having OTAs, they've reached a point where they've probably somewhat made up for it as far as football-related activities. And they've been around now for a few months, and they're only 5 games into the season. So I think that might have something to do with it as well. And also I think it's a simple fact that from the first snap, it was almost clear that one team was a lot better than the other team.
That's a good
And, State hung around and tried to fight, but Carolina is just a much, much better team. And it was so apparent. You don't have to know a lot about the sport of football to look out on the field yesterday and say, this blue team is a lot better than this red and white team.
For sure. I think one thing that occurred after the game during Sam Howell's press conference that actually made it feel like somewhat of a rivalry game was his comments. I think it was Bridget Condon that asked him about the NC State hype video. Shout out Bridget Condon. But about NC State hype video, that came out before the game, and I think Sam kind of said something of a ram. I think a ram's better than a wolf. I think we saw that today. We know what happens when a ram meets a wolf, kind of thing. I like that. I like that coming from Sam, especially because Sam's not a guy that you usually get a lot out of, especially in terms of I don't know if I call it trash talking, but just giving it to him a little bit. And also, you go look at UNC football's Twitter and Instagram right now, man. They've been sending some shots towards – I don't know if you've seen any of the videos or photos, AJ, but they've definitely been sending some shots towards the Wolfpack. But I think that was really, the only thing to me that made it really feel like a rivalry game, even, it's unfortunate that it actually ended up occurring after the game and not during it.
What I took from it is Sam – I'm going to use that G word again – Sam's personal growth as a guy. Yep. As a guy who stands in front of much older people asking him questions. Mm-hmm. Not an easy thing to do. Last year as a true freshman, we didn't get long, I'm not going to say they weren't well thought out answers, but they were sort of canned answers. They were enough to give a response and get on to the next question, which is very typical for most young players, most true freshmen in basketball. I mean, Garrison Brooks went through that. I joked with him last year, and it may have been in Greensboro for the ACC tournament. When you were a freshman, you gave 6-word answers. When you were a sophomore, you gave 12-word answers. You're giving us 25-word answers now as a junior. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'll give us 30-word answers as a senior. That's part of the thing I love about doing this is seeing these kids grow and get comfortable. And Sam is going to, when you're a quarterback, you have to face the program. You have to develop in that area. You're going to go into the NFL. You can't escape that. The mics are going to be in front of you all the time, and you've got to give the thought-out answers and answers that are they're pretty good for the most part. And I think what we saw with Sam's response yesterday was he's getting a lot more comfortable. And maybe Zoom's a little easier than having a bunch of us old guys in front of him.
Good point.
But Sam hasn't really tipped his hat, so to speak, to use a cliche. I'm very cliche-heavy this weekend, by the way. And but he kind of let it fly, and I think that's a good sign. He's comfortable with his guys. I think it's sort of him stepping forward even more as being the target of the program, and he's okay with it. As he becomes more and more comfortable with that, we're going to hear him say more stuff. I think it'll cross over into how he is as a leader. And Max has said multiple times, we're not a very vocal team. He wants vocal guys, but he doesn't want it forced. He wants it to be natural. So we're seeing some natural stuff come out of Sam on that front. And his response to Bridget's question, and yes, shout out to our friend Bridget, that was, I think, an example of that. And that's not throwing, that's not running, that's not checking down or reading defenses, but that's a part of this process as this club continues to move forward, because Sam's going to be there next year too. Everyone keeps pointing to 21. Well, if you've got big-time leadership and a big-time player at quarterback, that's such an amazing weapon to have, because being a great player is one thing. Being a great leader adds even more to it.
For sure. Totally agree, AJ. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the game itself. I think depth, if I got $1 for every time Mac Brown's mentioned depth since he took over in November 2018, I think I'd be sitting pretty good right now. I think I'd be sitting on a pretty big pile of money.
You wouldn't be working for peanuts for me anymore.
Oh, man. I mean, I'm not lying though, right? I mean, Mac Brown has talked about depth. It feels like I don't think he ever mentioned it during his introductory press conference, but heck, I wouldn't surprise me if he did.
He didn't know.
Yeah,
he didn't know what he was inheriting at the time.
Exactly.
He just knew about number 8, right? He keeps talking about, I asked if that number 8 was back. That's what he does. Anyway, go ahead.
But I think depth was on display yesterday. I think Mac, especially on Saturday, really started to kind of get some of that depth he's been looking for. Just to run through it for you guys. Yeah, Josh Downs playing. Obviously, Bo Corrales wasn't. Josh Downs comes in, scores his first touchdown. Emory Simmons is in there starting. Has a few catches, has a pretty solid game. Des Evans, yeah, I know. Really good game for Emory Simmons, who hasn't seen a lot of action since he stepped foot on campus. Des Evans gets that fumble recovery for Carolina. Had a pretty good game besides that. DeAndre Hollins steps in and gives some good minutes with Patrice Renee being out. I'm looking through the stats this morning and last night, and I see that Jaquarius Conley is second on the team in tackles yesterday. Now, I know a lot of that was kind of late in the fourth quarter and some of those scratch minutes, but still, I mean, did some good things when he came in. Cameron Roseman-Sinclair hasn't played at all this year, comes in and gets a pick. And then you got Tony Grimes, has a couple of tackles, playing a lot on special teams. So you got to, especially against the Wolfpack, I think we're starting to see that Carolina is starting to trust a few of more of those guys. You also had the Jacoby Criswell coming in late in the game. You had a lot of guys that hadn't seen a lot of minutes this year, if any, coming in late against the Wolfpack. So I think that's a big positive for Carolina, and that's really what Mac Brown and this program have been asking for. And that's probably the next step for this program as they continue to develop, is getting some of those young guys in there that they can trust to put in when it really matters.
Well, coaches can't trust them until they see them in action in an actual game. Practice is fantastic. But throw them out there in the field to see how they respond.
That's when you know.
Against another opponent. And it's no matter how hard you try to simulate practice, simulate a game in practice, you can't do it. So getting out there and getting some stuff done. I thought Conley, that's a really good point that you made there. He had to start up at BC, kind of struggled some, had an injury, and now he's working his way back in. And he had an opportunity to build some confidence yesterday. I thought Desmond Evans looked more like, okay, here's Desmond Evans. I mean, he didn't play in the opener. His first game was up at BC. He got some reps up there. It's kind of looked like a true freshman. But yesterday, he didn't look as much like a true freshman. I thought he looked pretty good out there.
I did too.
I really, really appreciated watching what Ladason Hollins did. And we're calling him, he's Day. Call him Day. I guess Ladason is his first name. Last year he went by DeAndre, so he's going by Ladason now. And last year he was thrown into a similar situation. They were losing DBs like crazy, and he was thrust into play in the Duke game, started the Virginia game, and 6 weeks earlier he was way down the depth chart. And Jay Bateman and Dre Bly had to get him ready to play, and they did a good job. And to his credit, he did well. He had a PBU against Duke that was huge in that game over in the corner of the end zone, and he played well yesterday. He had 3 tackles, he had 2 PBUs, and he stepped in and gave them a lot of snaps at corner. And I asked Mac about him after the game, and in Mac's answer, he actually brought up Tony Grimes. Eventually, that's going to be Grimes out there, but he's supposed to be a senior in high school. He's not quite ready for that kind of a load. So Hollins was sort of a Band-Aid in the process of getting Grimes ready. Last thing you want to do is throw Grimes out there and have his head spin, and then he loses confidence. And all the progress you've made since he showed up in the 1st of August, you would have to go back maybe to some point, 5, 6, 7 weeks ago and start building from there again. You don't want to mess with that. You want to keep Tony Grimes on the same track that he's on right now. And he ended up playing some, made a couple tackles. So huge performance by Hollins. The kind of thing that will pay off down the road because they didn't have to use Grimes and they didn't have to mess with that. And I know the way that they're bringing him along is really important to stay on track. So they were allowed to do that. I love that you brought up Emory Simmons as well. He had 5 receptions. He's another guy that's been banged up some. So what's interesting is some of the guys that were able to help yesterday are guys that have been hurt before. So they had depth issues before because they were out. Now they're back and they're adding to it. So Criswell getting reps. I know he didn't throw the ball, but just seeing the defense and having to bark at cadence and the speed of the game at the point of attack is still what it is. So a lot of value in those other guys getting on the field. And Mac will tell you, when a kid gets on the field and plays a few snaps, he got extra skip in their step, They're better practice players.
Oh, yeah.
They're all more part of being in the same room instead of here are the 45 guys that play all the time and everybody else. That room's a lot bigger. So it's great for morale. There's so many positives that came out of this performance and the week building up to it, all the things they learned from Tallahassee. Really, really important game for this program. And I say program because it's going to help them get wherever they're going to be down the road.
Exactly. It's all about building towards the future. I mean, that's something Mac Brown talks about all the time. AJ, I'm going to throw a stat at you. It's pretty crazy, actually. Carolina, led the last 6 quarters against NC State, has outscored the Wolfpack 80-21. Now, that's a lot, AJ. I mean, that's a big discrepancy in between scorelines. 80-21 is, I mean, Carolina. You look back in Carolina's recent struggles with the Wolfpack, barring the past couple seasons. Obviously, when Max got here, they've outscored the Wolfpack 80-21 in the last 6 quarters. So he's done a good job of turning that quarter. But you consider that this NC State program was a program that Carolina just could not beat, especially in the last couple of years under Fedora. I mean, they just really struggled to beat this program. It just seemed like the Wolfpack had their number. That's completely flipped in Carolina's favor. And I think looking at that stat alone really highlights just how the direction this program's headed and maybe also the direction that State's program has been headed over the past couple seasons as well.
Well, a lot of people are having a tough time beating State. They won 9 games in a row, 9 games a couple straight years. And, I think it was the 14 quarters. If you go up to halftime last year in Carter Finley, I think the prior 14 quarters, Carolina scored 75 points against State. Mm-hmm. They have 80 in the 6 quarters since then. And probably could have scored more yesterday. I mean, they kind of took their foot off the gas early in the 4th quarter. I mean, there's no need to pour. I know some Carolina fans are like, why didn't Mac keep pouring on? They're your hated rivals. There's nothing to gain by that. Just get the other guys in the field. What we just talked about in the last part of this podcast, there's more long-term value in that than running up a score. There's no Steve Spurrier stuff going on here. State's a good program. This was a pretty good team they played, and they absolutely took them apart. I think what this shows is that, State may have been here when Mac was hired and Carolina here, and it's very quickly flipped like this. Mm-hmm. And I don't know quite for sure what direction State's going. I don't think it's going plummeting like Larry's program did his last couple of years. I just think that it appears that way because Carolina is ascending so quickly and so sharply. When you look at Carolina's national stat rankings, really impressive. I think people look and they see a few mistakes and they really kind of zero in on that and focus on that and disregard the negatives. And maybe we did a little bit too much of that following Florida State because of how bad the first half was. Maybe didn't give as much credence to what they did in the second half and coming back. That happens when a team explodes the way UNC has. They were number 5 in the polls, and you start looking for all the reasons why maybe they shouldn't be number 5. Well, where they are right now is probably where they need to be. As of when we're recording this, we don't know what they're ranked this week. Probably moved up a couple of spots. I think that's a good place. When you start looking around the nation, I think that's kind of who they are right now. And we do know one thing, Jacob, that offense is going to show up. And it's going to show up every week to some degree. So as long as the defense is pretty good, they have a chance to win a lot of games. And the defense was pretty good yesterday. You get 4 turnovers, and you keep them to 1.9 yards a rush, and you do what you did offensively. There's very few teams out there that would have a chance of beating them. And so this was a really good performance, not just cutting the cord to what happened the week before, but learning from it, but also because they flexed their muscles in State again. They've got Virginia coming up, they've got Duke coming up, and Wake coming up, and they've already taken care of Virginia Tech. This is their in-state schools and the clubs that they recruit against, the 2 Virginia schools. They got to take care of business here. Max says that winning, beating a specific opponent head-to-head doesn't really affect recruiting that much. It doesn't in one game, but a series of games it does.
Yeah, it does.
There's no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. So I think that these are really important games for this program to kind of take on that status of being the program of Virginia and North Carolina. We can't say the region because those guys down in Clemson are doing their thing, but Carolina's trying to gravitate toward that level, and you got to do it by taking care of what's around you first, and then take care of the Virginia schools and everything else. So that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're seeing this program, starting to grow. I mean, you talk about beating your rivals. It maybe it doesn't affect recruiting this year, but you start beating them 2, 3, 4 times in a row. there's no doubt that it has an impact on recruiting, especially in the state of North Carolina. And let's talk about the offense a little bit more. Javonte Williams, huge game from him yesterday. Michael Carter sneaks in with over 100 yards rushing as well. I think he had 2 receptions for 46 yards too. So, I mean, he was close. I think Javonte finished with 160 yards on the ground. I think Michael Carter total yardage was just a few yards shorter than him. So, big game from Michael Carter as well. Javonte Williams has 3 touchdowns. That speaks a lot to the talent of those guys. But I thought Sam had a solid game yesterday. They're not relying on Sam, at least right now, with how deadly that running game has been over the past couple games, especially. They're not relying on him to, throw for 400, yards like maybe he did some last year. They're able to kind of spread it out a little bit and give that running game some work. And got to give credit to the offensive line as well. I mean, you talk about the running game being so successful. I mean, a lot of that goes to the offensive line. Javonte Williams basically said the same thing yesterday in his post-game press conference. So, I mean, over the last 6 quarters in particular, forget the first half against Florida State. That was a bad performance from the whole team as a whole. But you look at the last 6 quarters for this offense, I mean, they've done some really nice things, started to click or finishing drives well. I mean, it's an offense right now that should have a lot of confidence, especially when you're coming off, putting 48 points over your rivals.
Yeah, somebody posted on our message board, hey, we got to give Michael Carter some love because no one's talking about him. Well, remember 2 weeks ago after Virginia Tech, when Michael ran for like 220-something yards and had a bunch of receiving yards? I mean, these guys are so good that it's, 1 week one guy's going to blow up. The next week another guy's going to blow up. I think the thing that gives Javonte's performance a little bit more staying power maybe than Michael's is because of how he does it. Yeah. All the PFF numbers are not out yet at the time of this recording, but PFF was tweeting out last night that Javonte forced 17 missed tackles Saturday. Now that's sick. That's unheard of. He by himself. Not to mention running over Garrett Walston going into the end zone.
That's a heck of a clip, man. I thought Garrett Walston, that looked like it hurt. I was looking at Garrett like, dang, man, that hurt me looking at it.
Someone carted Garrett off the field. He got in Javonte's way. It's just the way he does. He runs people over. There are a whole lot of backs I've seen that are like him. It's really, really impressive. And he runs with an aggression. We talked a little bit about it in the 3 Things podcast. He just runs with this aggression, but he combines it with plenty of grace. Mm-hmm. That, in fact, one of his touchdown runs yesterday, one of the ones you got in the ISO video that we'll have up, I guess, Monday when the 48-hour window is closed. Mm-hmm. He had a 27-yard touchdown run untouched. Yeah. He probably didn't like that because he didn't. Well, let me tell you a quick story. Sidebar here. Quick story. When I played in high school, we played against McNamara one time. McNamara was in the top 20 in the D.C. area. We weren't very good. I played at 2 schools. This is the private school I played at. But we had this guy at safety who was terrible, okay? And McNamara had this 215-pound running back, and he busted doing a dive play, and he's going right at the safety. I'm not kidding you. The kid tried to get out of the way, and the running back just kind of followed him like a laser because he wanted to run him over. We watched it in game film like 7 times.
I love that.
On repeat. We were all laughing. The kid was humiliated, but we're talking the 80s here when we can get away with stuff like that. Javonte didn't hit anybody on that touchdown run. And it's probably like, that wasn't challenging enough. But you know why I didn't hit anybody? Because the hole was enormous. And the receivers blocked. It was a perfect play. It was the perfect play. And Javonte danced into the end zone untouched. And that's the kind of day it was for the offensive line. That's the kind of day it was for Javonte. And you're right. I'm glad you brought up Michael because he had a really, really good game. That catch, not touchdown, but that catch he caught in that ball on the left sideline from Sam. Michael's talked about getting in slot and doing some of the stuff that a slot receiver does out of the running back position. And I think that was an example of that. And, he can get on some ISOs out there and get open. It's just another weapon. They have so many. It's really, really amazing. And another good point you made was about Sam. I think Sam doesn't have the pressure to just put the team on his back and chuck them to a victory. Yeah. He chucked a lot at Florida State, and that was his high passing game of the year, but they were also way behind. And they had to move the ball kind of quickly, and he was really good. And so they know that if they got to rely on him, they can rely on him. But when you got that running game going and you're mixing it up, I mean, Phil Longo's got a lot of toys to play with, and I'm sure he's enjoying it right now.
He does. It's crazy when you think about it. I mean, just the talent that they have. I mean, we're not even talking about the wide receiver position, which is loaded with talent as well. So, yeah, offense right now has been, over the past 6 quarters, like I mentioned, is has been really, really performing really well. Let's focus on the D a little bit, AJ. Defense did a great job stopping the run yesterday. We talked about this on the three things as well, but State had 34 rushing yards yesterday. I mean, what was it? What was the stat, AJ? 1.8 yards per carry, something like that? 1.9 yards per carry. I mean, that's been a criticism of this defense. That's something we've kind of talked about for a majority of this year, but I mean, you can't really say anything about the defense's performance stopping the run yesterday. I thought it was really well. I thought they got some pressure on the quarterbacks as well, Finley and Hockman. There was a lot of times where they weren't very comfortable back there trying to figure out who they're going to pass it to. So I think it's a lot of positives. We talked about a lot of positive for this offense to build on it from that performance, but I think the defense probably needed that kind of performance more than the offense did.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the offense is good enough to get to the ACC championship game and play in a major bowl game. The offense is good enough to do that. We've seen that. But the question is the defense. And what did we talk about in August when we did these podcasts? The defensive front has to be at least average.
Yep.
If they're average, then the athletic ability and the strengths of the guys behind them will show up. Well, we saw that with Chaz and Gemmel yesterday. The secondary is not what we thought it was going to be because they've lost so many guys.
No, it's been unfortunate.
That was the deepest room when camp opened, and right now you're going back to Hollins to get him into a game because Renee was out. They've lost so many. If they had Woolfolk, if they had Watts, if they had DJ Ford, who opted out. I mean, DJ Ford played almost 1,000 snaps. Mac even told us yesterday that when they didn't use a nickel and they went to a base defense, that Morrison went to safety and Chapman played corner some.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if they had DJ Ford. He could play safety. Morrison could go over there and play corner even because Morrison started all those different positions. If you had Bryce Watts, you would have had a guy that started 12 games at Virginia Tech at corner. If you had Miles Woolfolk back there, just think of the experience they'd have in the back of that defense that they are trying to accumulate right now. So the front has to play well, and they played pretty well yesterday. They played well enough to allow the athletes to come in and swarm. I don't know how many times an NC State ball carrier went to the ground and there were 3 and 4 blue hats around.
Oh, yeah.
That hadn't been the case. I mean, they missed 39 tackles in the previous 2 games. Don't yet know the official number yet for this game because PFF hadn't come out yet, but they didn't miss that many.
Yeah.
The average was 19 and a half the last 2 games. They didn't miss 19 tackles. They missed some, but not a lot. They were swarming. A lot of guys were getting to the ball. Heat-seeking missiles. That's what you want on defense, and it's a lot easier for Chaz and Gemmel and those guys to make their plays when the guys up front are handling what Mac talked about earlier in the week, gap control. So we saw more of that. And if they can just be solid in that respect, the defense will be plenty good enough. Because, a lot of people are beating on the defense, but look at their national ranking numbers. Not bad. They're 28th defensively in the red zone. It's pretty good. If you have a great offense and you're good enough defensively, especially this year, you're in their schedule, you're going to win a lot of games. I mean, there's nobody on their schedule they can't beat, and certainly they might be favored all the way up until after Thanksgiving for sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure that performance yesterday left Jay Bateman feeling pretty good. It was funny. I was sitting on the concourse. I was on the concourse shooting photos, and I can't go up into the press box until the press conference is over after the game. And I'm sitting on the concourse in a chair, editing my photos, listening to the press conference, and Jay Bateman walks right in front of me, and he kind of looks at me and says, "Hey, man, I'll see you on Monday." All smiles. He was feeling great after that performance yesterday. So yeah, it was a lot of positives for this defense to build on. And like I mentioned, I think this was a performance that the defense needed maybe more than the offense needed because they were in search of some positives to look for going into the rest of the season. I think they got
and let me add to that. When I mentioned something about Mac's message to them was turnovers will come in bunches. Just be patient.
Yep.
Do your job, handle your assignment, and the turnovers will come. They will come. They will come. They will come. They had 2 forced going into yesterday, and then they got 4. And they were huge. One of them they got started possession at the 9-yard line. Another one they got in NC State's end zone, and that was an NC State mistake. John Chapman admitted that. Hey, guy made a mistake on the ball, but Chapman didn't quit on it, and he ended up getting to the pick. And I think Carolina scored on the following possession. So when stuff plays out over the course of the season, and it's one of those, oh yeah, coach was right moments. Or, oh, yeah, coach was right games like yesterday was. It really fortifies everything they're doing. It brings everything together. And there were 2 huge things that stood out that Mac kept saying the turnovers were going to come. Just handle your job. Do what you're supposed to do. Trust me, it's going to come. Well, they got 4. And the other thing was, you got to have a different mindset. You got to prepare the way you're going to play. And I think when you juxtaposed FSU week with last week, they learned that. So Mac's message is very loud. I think that it gets through more now than it did even a week ago. Not like there were issues a week ago. It's just human nature. He's dealing with 19, 20, 21-year-old kids. They got a lot of other things going on right now other than just football. And in the last 10 days or so, last 9 days, they've had a real dose of education. And I think as a program, they're much better off having gone through these last 9 days.
For sure. You talked about Mac's message in terms of turnovers. Another message that Mac's had for his team is worrying about themselves. I mean, he's said it so many times after the Florida State loss, even before the Florida State loss. So we're not a top 5 team. It's not where we're at right now. We're building. We're still trying to build for the future. We're nowhere near a top 5 team right now. He kind of said that, I think it was yesterday in his post-game press conference, he kind of touched on Florida State, and he said that his team in Tallahassee just went in there way too confident. They thought they could just show up and beat anybody. And obviously in this league, it doesn't matter who you're playing. You can show up on any game day, and if you're not ready to play, you'll get beat. I think Carolina yesterday worried about themselves. They didn't worry about what State was saying. They didn't worry about what all the analysts are saying about, Carolina's got to come out here and win by 3 touchdowns, whatever. They worried about themselves. They took care of their job. And like I mentioned, I like to say this a lot, that it reflected on the scoreboard. But I think you could really see it yesterday in just how easily Carolina handled NC State. I think that shows when Carolina comes ready to play, when they're focused on themselves and just doing their jobs, they're a really hard team, and they're a really, really, really hard team to beat, and a team that has a high ceiling, I think.
And they weren't there at that point last year.
No.
You could, when a team or a program gets to where, look, you scout the opponent, you prepare for what they do, you know the opponent, but if you go in and just do what you're supposed to do, you take care of yourself, then you're going to be in good shape to win every time. Mm-hmm. That's where Carolina basketball's been for the last 60 years. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's where Clemson football is right now, and Carolina wants to get to that point. But I do think that this team, given the competition that they're playing almost every week, and this is right up to the Notre Dame game, that if they just take care of themselves and handle their own jobs, they're going to win these games. They'll win at UVA. They'll win at Duke. They'll beat Wake. Then they have an open date, and then it's Notre Dame time. Then we're going to find out a lot, okay?
Yeah.
But they not that they're not going to scout these other guys, but just show up, do what you're supposed to do. And that's a really strong point to me, because when they didn't know anything about when they played South Carolina or Miami, even when they went to the bowl game. I mean, yeah, let's be who we are, but they still weren't 100% sure, because they were a 6-6 football team.
Exactly.
They had to win its last 2 regular season games just to qualify for the Military Bowl. Mm-hmm. The Military Bowl was exciting for these guys last year, but I don't think that that's their goal right now, because they're continuing to grow from that. So you bring up a good point. Just be who you are, worry about yourself, take care of your own business, and things are going to work out in your favor most of the time right now. They're not at the Clemson level yet, but Clemson had to do that on its way to becoming what it is now. All really good programs do. And that's one of the really cool things about covering Mac and what he's trying to build here. He's not just a guy trying to win every week. I've covered a lot of coaches that just coach to win that game, football and basketball. And sometimes we're going to be totally different against this opponent to beat them. And next week we're going to be completely different against that opponent to try to beat them. And then you get 4 or 5 games down the road and you're like, okay, well, how'd they get better? Mm-hmm. You got to be who you are. You got to play to your strengths, be who you are, accentuate your strengths, and grow from there. And we're seeing this program do that. The last 9-10 days, I must say it 1,000 times, because people need to understand, this was a huge segment of whatever this program is going to become under Mac Brown. And it's fun to watch and cover, because it gives us something different to watch. It gives us something really interesting to track. And it's also something that we now judge them by. Mm-hmm. And last week, they got D's. This week, they got A's.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, I mean, big win for Carolina yesterday. I mean, not much more you can say than that. Like I said, I didn't expect Carolina to win as easily as they did. I expected State to put up a little bit more of a fight. But I think we mentioned it earlier in the podcast. I think it was just a team. You could see it from really the first whistle. It was just a Carolina team that was on paper and on the field just better than NC State. Anything else you want to add, AJ, before we end it?
No. I enjoyed doing the postscript. We do 3 things after the game, and we can only hit on 3 things. We're married to it, so we can only stay with that. We don't want to do a 7-hour video because we probably could. So this gives us a little bit more time to kind of pile on some other things that we didn't hit on in that, or my 5 takeaways. Our objective is when we get to Sunday evening, we cover every nook and cranny of the game. And this is fun. Plus, it gives you a chance to talk a lot more. Yeah. I can just sit here and not yap. I know people think I yap too much.
Nah, man.
My wife thinks I yap too much.
Hey, man, when you got as great insight and intel that you have, AJ, I mean, I just gotta let you go, man. You know what I mean?
No, but anyway, I enjoyed this. We're going to do this after every game. And it's going to be interesting. We're going to talk a lot about these same things, Jacob.
Oh, yeah.
This is how one of the things that we talk about is how I cover a team. And I use their stated mission, especially when it's legitimate, as sort of the base from how I cover them, how I judge them. And this team has that, but more than anything, this is an elevator ride.
Oh, yeah.
So they were on the 8th floor, 9th floor 10 days ago. Now they're on the 14th floor, and they're going up. And it's a pretty interesting thing to chronicle. And by the time Notre Dame comes down, they need to be in the 20s. So we're going to judge them between now and then as they get to the 20s. So, and this postscript thing is another way to sort of get out those thoughts.
Exactly. I'm looking forward to seeing how the season continues. I mean, Carolina, when you look at their schedule going forward, the next few games especially, I mean, Duke, Wake Forest, Virginia, I mean, you've got some opponents there that Carolina should be beating. So it's going to be
rivals.
Yeah, I mean, rival games too. But on paper, I mean, you look at those teams, I don't think any of those teams won more than maybe.
Oldest rivalry in the South will commence with.
Now, looking forward to it. Halloween night. Maybe we'll have a full moon. You know, maybe it'll get spooky out there. Who knows? But
and I will have a fun story when we do our preview pod too, because the first sporting event of any kind I ever covered was that 1996 Carolina at Virginia football game, which I still say is maybe the biggest loss in Carolina history. It's at least one of the 3 or 4.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, like AJ mentioned, we got a preview pod coming out. Have a ton of content coming out this week, as we always do at TarIllustrated.com and on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated. That's going to do it for us. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, be sure to like it, be sure to share it, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.